faces and some other law students and folks here. It's a wonderful tribute. As many of you knew Ann Schneider, we are honoring her today. We hope to do more things in her name. So this is the first lecture of what we hope will be many in a law and policy series that is dedicated to Ann's memory. Now, the foundation is proud to be part of this group of respected water leaders. You all are, but if you look in the names of in the program, you'll see a list of folks who've really spent some time and effort to begin this foundation that we will have in Ann's memory. And right now, that's within the Water Education Foundation, but it can grow and develop and do lots of things with us or on the outside. So we are happy to be here tonight. I want to note that Ann received in 2006 the Water Education Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. And, well, she was the first woman lawyer to receive that, but the real thing was that we felt she really, in her career, exemplified the fact that rather than just being a litigator, she was a problem solver. And you'll hear many people talk about that this evening. She had the skill to bring opponents together. Now, I have a lot of personal memories of Ann as when I was a young journalist and she was a young attorney and we were moms, and we had to keep that quiet, you know. But sometimes during those policy discussions, we'd look across the room and we're the only women, but that was the beginning. And, but what I do want to say in thinking about Ann is just one memory. And that is that she genuinely believed in her work. And I remember one time, she came up to me in a parking lot and she said, "Rita, you really sounded cynical. You know, you can't just get cynical because we don't solve these problems overnight, like the Delta." But she was really serious, and she said, you know, get your head on straight, turn it around, think about it. We're in this for the long run. And she made me really think. Not that I don't get cynical once in a while, but I remember what she told me. I remember how she looked at me. I remember what she said. She meant it. She lived it. And I'm really proud to be part of this tribute to her this evening. Thank you. Oh, I'm going to introduce now a member of her law firm, Rob Donlin. Rob.
Thanks, Rita. I'm Robert Donlin. I was a partner of Ann's. On behalf of the Ann J. Schneider Foundation and Lecture Series Steering Committee, I want to welcome you to the Mondavi Center for the inaugural Ann Schneider Lecture featuring Judge Roby. We are humbled by the initial success of this effort, and I'm sure that Ann would have been, and we look forward to continuing this tribute long into the future. As many of you know, in 1977 and 1978, Ann Schneider served on the Governor's Commission for Review of Water Rights Law in California. Ann's groundwater report to the Commission is widely considered within the water community to be one of the most thorough and authoritative writings on California groundwater law even today, some 35 years after it was written. Lesser known is that Ann also authored the Commission's report on the legal aspects of in-stream water uses in California. The in-stream report comprehensively surveyed the law and concluded with a list of issues, poses questions, which encouraged the reader to think more deeply and reach her or his own conclusions about the state of the law and need for reform. That was Ann's way and portended Ann's approach to complex issues throughout her legal career. Do your homework and take the time necessary to fully understand the facts and the science behind a problem. Consider the facts with intellectual honesty and encourage others to do the same, and collaborate with your allies and adversaries towards an effective solution that is grounded in those facts, the relevant science, and the law. This approach to problem solving, coupled with her keen intellect, quickly elevated Ann to the top of her field and earned her the respect and admiration of her peers. At the time of her passing, Ann's client list included some of the largest municipal and institutional water suppliers in the state. The core interest of this group of clients, of course, was the development and protection of water resources for human uses, and they could have found no better legal advocate than Ann Schneider. But Ann also represented nonprofits and conservation groups whose primary goal was often committed to in-stream and non-consumptive uses. For this group of clients as well, there was no better legal advocate than Ann Schneider. Ann's advocacy for water development interests on the one hand and environmental and conservation groups on the other initially struck me as contradictory. Ideologically, how can an attorney effectively advocate at the same time for water development and in-stream preservation? But to Ann, there was no ideological compromise. If Ann could fully understand the facts, the science and the law that surrounded a particular resource problem, then she could formulate the framework for a solution that was informed and durable and that fairly balanced water supply and ecological considerations. And she could help her clients and opponents separate their actual needs from their momentary interests and positions and ultimately arrive at compromises that effectively balance the public interest in the water use. As Ann once told me when I asked her how her proposed solution might affect one of our clients should not be afraid of the facts. If the facts do not support our position, then we need to rethink our position. The Ann J. Schneider Foundation has been established on the principles that Ann practiced throughout her career. The vision of the foundation is grounded in the notion that we should not be afraid to ask the hard questions, that we should take the time necessary to develop informed answers, and that we should not shy away from or bury the answers that reveal themselves. And above all else, our water and natural resources decisions should be grounded in science and in fact, and consistent with the law. In furtherance of these principles, the Ann J. Schneider Foundation has been established as an independent 501c3 corporation within the Water Education Foundation. The foundation will be funded with tax-deductible donations from firms, companies, agencies, and individuals that share Ann's vision to solving natural resource problems. The foundation will fund grants, scholarships, projects, and studies that further our understanding of the facts, science, and law that inform natural resource problems and solutions. Over the next several months, the steering committee will be working with the foundation and others to fully develop the funding criteria for the foundation. We welcome and encourage your donations to the Ann Schneider Foundation. Before I turn the podium over to Art Baggett, I want to recognize a few people who are here today. Though we can all call ourselves among Ann's long list of fans and friends, I wanted to, in particular, recognize Ann's sons, Charlie and Logan, and Ann's brother and sister, Billy and Maggie. I would also like to acknowledge one of Ann's closest and personal friends, Joe Scalmanini, who unfortunately could not be here today. Joe asked me to pass on his regards to Ann's family and friends and his wishes for a successful inaugural lecture. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for being here today as we kick off what we hope is the first of many lectures that appropriately memorialize Ann's own commitment to water and natural resource policy advancement. Thank you.
Phyllis and I just returned from rafting to the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River with a group of friends and some Southwest water folks. And I can tell you, not a day went by on that trip when I didn't think of Ann. I mean, the trip had it all. It was a great river ride. It's wild country, complex issues of competing demands for land and water, the camaraderie of friends and family and colleagues. I mean, that was Ann's world, those of us who spent time with her. During Ann's final months, she talked with many of us in this room about trips like that, about beautiful places, family and friends and things important. But she also would go off and delve into these conversations with a few of us on the future of water law and policy. As you know, she wasn't just a scholar. Ann was a lawyer that cared deeply about solving these complex problems, not just billing hours. She would be really frustrated if you were around her at a hearing with no conclusion or no end. She wanted practical solutions to problems. I mean, I can recall on the Klamath when Pacific Corps hired her, and about a week later, I get 1,500 pages in the mail because I was doing the negotiations. Ann sent back to 1890s, 1880s, Fish and Game reports, and what the amazing thing was, she calls me up and said, "You want to talk?" She had read every single word of those 1,500 pages. She was always prepared on the law, the facts, and the science, as Rob said. She believed that the law, or the doctrine of waste and unreasonable use as embedded in our Constitution, was a really major evolution in how society is dealing with our finite water resources and how you deal with those competing issues. It also talked a lot about the public trust doctrine, sort of the other leg, the other big doctrine. and how that was also part of this evolution of society and its relationship to land and water. But what she felt was missing was a unifying theory, some doctrine that has yet to evolve that would make some sense out of these two doctrines when they run into each other and compete. And how are we going to deal with the future, especially in the West, of these limited resources with these doctrines that at times clash? And I think that question, which she pondered and many of us in this room talked to her about one-on-one, was the genesis of this idea for this lecture series. Our goal is to invite respected individuals like Judge Roby to present and ponder these questions and present their thoughts and have some discussion about these. So it's with great pleasure tonight that I introduce one of Ann's other dear friends and a member of the Boys Club, along with her sons, Bob Maddow, who worked with Ann as not only in his days at East Bay Lead, but in private practice, Governor's Commission. I know he had interaction there also. So Bob.
Thank you, Art. As Art says, I'm Bob Maddow. I've been in the business of practicing water law and all that that entails for 40 years now. 21 years at East Bay Mud, 19 years in private practice, and I was really happy, I'm very happy to be able to say that at the time of the Governor's Commission that Rob referred to, I first got to know Ann, and in fact a couple of other people were in this room here today who worked so closely with that commission, and I'm one of those people who still says that within arm's reach of my desk chair in my office at all times, I have to have two things: Ann's paper on groundwater, Ann's paper on in-stream water use. They remain sort of seminal documents in my mind, and that's one of the many reasons why I will never forget her. Art said something about the Boys Club. Not too many years ago, Bob Schneider, in Ann's backyard one day, referred to 4 of us who were there one day to have lunch with her in the backyard under that big tree as Ann's boys. It was Kevin O'Brien, Rob Donlin, Joe Scalmanini, and me. And of course, Charlie and Logan are really Ann's boys, but we very proudly accepted that phrase that Bob coined, and we still talk to each other about it. Rob mentioned Joe. Joe would love to be here. His daughter Jenna is here today. Jenna was following in her father's professional footsteps. But Joe right now is on his way to Lourdes. Joe is battling a health problem of his own, and he and his wife were greatly honored to be selected to be participants in a pilgrimage to Lourdes. I saw Joe and Mary on Sunday, and I said, Joe, I never think of you as being a real spiritual person, a real religious person. He said, I have my own form of spirituality, and besides that, Bob, remember the story of Lourdes, St. Bernadette, there's a spring. This is a business trip. And Mary looked over at me and she laughed. I'm sure she was laughing or crying, but she said, Ann would appreciate that. It's very true. It is, I feel deeply honored to be asked to participate in this inaugural lecture in this, what I believe will become a very important water law and policy lecture series. And my hat is off to the Water Education Foundation for working so hard to facilitate this, to Rob and the others who have helped to put it together. We are deeply honored today to have this inaugural lecture given by Justice Ron Roby. I completely endorse what Art said about how Ann would reflect on sort of the long view, the bigger picture, what could be. And Justice Roby has prepared a paper and will deliver a lecture today that really embraces that spirit in a remarkable way. And he is, I believe, uniquely qualified to do that. I don't know of anyone else in our state's history who comes from the many perspectives that he brings to water law and policy. He was in the legislative branch and was the principal author of Porter Cologne as the director of the staff of the Assembly Water Committee. He was vice chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. And of course, he was the director of water resources. And then he served at 3 different levels of the judiciary, the Muni Court, the Superior Court, and now, of course, for 10 years on the Court of Appeal. His history is synonymous with what California water law has been for the last 40 plus years. One of my favorite thoughts about him, however, is that he is the only appellate court justice that I know of in California history who can truthfully say that there's a pump storage facility named after him. I'll go up to Carmelito now and see the Ronald B. Roby pumping and generating facility, I think it's called. Justice Roby is going to deliver his lecture. When he is done, he and I are going to engage in a brief conversation. Please listen carefully and think about your own questions. We're going to try and entertain some questions, but without further ado, Justice Roby.
Thank you very much, Bob. On this Law Day, I'm truly honored to have been chosen by the Ann J. Schneider Foundation to give the inaugural address in the memory of Ann, and in support of the Foundation's efforts to encourage professional and personal commitment to water law and policy. As you've heard already, Ann was an amazing person, an accomplished college athlete, mountain climber, skier, marathon runner, long-distance cyclist, a devoted mother, a dedicated conservationist, and most importantly for our purposes, a gifted and skilled attorney. Not to mention one of the first women to practice water and natural resources law back when it was a rare thing indeed. But what I think of most when I think of Ann is the kind of attorney she was. Last year I heard our Chief Justice, Tommy Cantil-Sacraway, graduated from here and I served with for many years on various courts, speak at an inter-court meeting in Stockton, and the Chief said, an ethical attorney is one who does the right thing when no one is looking. To me, the Chief Justice was describing Ann. In her practice, Ann felt a duty to guide her clients away from the hard line, to consider the broader public interest in addition to their own private interest. And as the author of Ann's obituary put it, Ann's desire to find a comprehensive and fair-minded solution for the most intractable issues defined her practice. I think Ann's ability to look for the comprehensive and fair-minded solutions to our state's water problems, to see the big picture, and to get her clients to see that picture too, stemmed not only from who she was as a person, but of also the way she came into the practice of water law in the first place. As some, but maybe not all of you know, she graduated from UC Davis here. And in 1976, as the worst drought in history struck our state, as director of the Department of Water Resources, I and John Bryson, then the chair of the State Water Board, recommended to Governor Brown that he establish a broad-based commission to review California water rights law. Just as California's water quality law had been substantially updated and revised with the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act in 1969, we hope that a blue ribbon commission headed by the recently retired Chief Justice could help us obtain the public and water community support needed to convince the legislature to act to modernize California's archaic and sometimes arcane water rights law. Now, in the early years of his administration, Governor Brown sincerely supported change and reform in California water institutions, and so he decided to proceed on our recommendation. And so it was that Ann, fresh out of law school, was hired along with 3 other brand new lawyers, including Cliff Lee, who's out there right now, to constitute the research staff of the Governor's Commission to review California water rights law. Anne described her work for the commission as, quote, the ultimate postdoctoral educational opportunity, close quotes. Among her contributions, as you've already heard, to the commission's work were two wonderful staff reports, Groundwater Rights in California and Legal Aspects of In-Stream Uses in California, which, as Bob said and others, remain important resources for lawyers today, more than 30 years after they were written, in some respects, because nothing's changed since then. Her scholarship was impeccable, and personally, I must say, it was a true joy to have her and these other young, wonderful lawyers serve on this commission. In thinking about how Anne came to be the lawyer she was, it occurred to me that working for the commission may have had something to do with it. Being able to devote her initial years as an attorney to considering and contemplating not just what the state of water rights law in California was, but what the law ought to be, gave Anne a perspective on water law and policy that most practitioners never get. And today, as we move into a future when we're not going to be able to manage the state's water resources as we have in the past, I think it's a perspective we can all benefit from. So in honoring Anne's memory, I think we should take the opportunity to think broadly about water law and policy as Anne did, to consider the bigger picture, to contemplate not just what is or has been, but what ought to be. In reflecting on that point, what California water law and policy ought to be, it is important to note that more than 30 years since the defeat of the Poles of Governor Brown's water program, and my departure from the Department of Water Resources, there has been very little development of new water supplies in California. In fact, considering that the southern part of the state has been forced to cut back on its historic use of Colorado River water, which up to now, until recently, had roughly exceeded the state's actual entitlement by 20%, water supplies are actually less than they used to be. In the meantime, the population of the state has continued to grow by leaps and bounds. The figures are all too familiar. The Census Bureau's numbers are really staggering. In 1980, there were 23 million people living in California. But by 2010, there were 37 million people living here. In other words, in those 30 years, the population increased by more than 13 million people, which is an increase of more than 50%. And according to the Bureau's projections, this is going to keep coming. And we will have in 2030, which is not that long from now, a population of over 46 million people. That means the population will literally have doubled in the 50 years between 1980 and 2030. And you can be assured that the majority of the people coming to California or being born here are not going to be where the water is. So you're going to imagine you're going to need water, and we're going to need it in a lot more places from where it comes from. And in over 30 years, in the absence of